Elijah Brooks didn't say much. Not because he was shy, but because he learned early on that most people didn't listen when he did. He lived on the west side of Baton Rouge, not far from Florida Boulevard, in a tight, two-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls and neighbors who argued louder than necessary. His mother, Charlene, worked double shifts at a local clinic. His older brother Isaiah, always running with a crew Elijah didn't trust. But Elijah had something neither of them had time for: music. He didn't own a fancy instrument. No grand piano, no state-of-the-art equipment. Just a battered old keyboard at the neighborhood rec center. Half the keys were broken, and the power cord sparked if you moved it wrong. But Elijah didn't care. That keyboard was his lifeline. Every afternoon after school, he'd rush over with fingers aching to play. No sheet music. No formal lessons. Just the melodies he carried in his heart. He played what he felt: joy, anger, confusion, silence. No one taught him. Some things don't need teaching, they just are. At school, Elijah flew under the radar. Never a troublemaker. Never a standout. Most teachers missed the way he tapped rhythms during math, or how his eyes sparkled when the school anthem played during morning announcements. But one person noticed: Miss Delacroix, the music teacher at Martin Luther King Jr. Middle. She saw beyond his quiet nature. She'd hear him humming in the cafeteria and pull him aside to ask about scales, chords, emotion, how to speak through hands rather than words. "You hear the world differently, Elijah," she once told him, after he improvised a lullaby for a class project. "Don't you ever let that go." He didn't plan to. Then came the announcement, just before spring break. Their school would participate in an arts exchange with Bayside Prep, an elite private school across town. A day of workshops, music, and student showcases. Most kids groaned. But Elijah, he sat up straight. He'd heard of Bayside. Big green lawns. Uniforms. A cafeteria that served sushi. Rumor had it their music department had baby grands in every classroom. Elijah had never touched a real piano before. He'd seen one once, at a symphony concert the school took them to. It gleamed under the lights like something out of a dream. He hadn't heard most of the music that night. He was too busy watching the pianist's hands. Now he might finally touch one. The night before the trip, Charlene ironed his best shirt, even though it had a faded stain near the cuff. "You behave," she said without looking up. "Don't go embarrassing me in front of those people." "I won't." "Don't touch nothin' you're not supposed to." He nodded. He meant it, too. But music had a way of making him forget the rules. What Elijah didn't know was that one decision, or maybe one moment of courage, was about to change everything. The bus ride to Bayside took only 30 minutes, but when Elijah stepped through the iron gates, it felt like another planet. Trimmed hedges. Working fountains. Buildings that looked like museums. Kids in pressed navy blazers laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Elijah followed his classmates quietly, gripping his backpack strap. He didn't speak, just stared at the polished floors, the lemony scent of the halls, the bronze statue of a founder smiling smugly in the courtyard. Student artwork lined the walls, framed like museum pieces. One even had a price tag, $200. Elijah could draw too, but no one had ever offered to buy his sketches. They gathered in the auditorium. Bayside students sat in neat rows as a silver-haired man welcomed them with the kind of voice used at Sunday church. He spoke of unity and talent from all backgrounds. Elijah scanned the crowd. Of everyone there, he was one of maybe 5 black students. Next came a jazz performance from the Bayside Ensemble. It was good, clean, crisp, clearly rehearsed. But it felt safe. Elijah's chest tightened. Not because he felt small, but because he knew he had something, too. He just didn't have the stage to prove it. That was about to change. In breakout sessions, Elijah was assigned to a songwriting workshop in room 208. He walked there quietly, surrounded by strangers talking about Teslas and private chefs. Room 208 was nothing like the music room back home. This one had soundproof walls, ceiling-high windows, and instruments arranged with military precision. Guitars, violins, even a cello. And then, he saw it. A black Steinway grand piano. Bigger, glossier, and more magnificent than anything he'd ever seen. The lid was open. The keys shimmered like ivory. The instructor hadn't arrived yet. Most students found seats and chatted. But Elijah couldn't move. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the piano. Then, a voice behind him. "Don't even think about it." Elijah turned. A tall blond boy with slicked back hair stood nearby, flanked by two others. His blazer had gold initials PJW. "That piano," the boy sneered. "My dad paid for that. You got anything like that where you're from?" Elijah blinked. Was he serious? "I wasn't gonna break it," Elijah replied. "You sure about that?" The boy smirked. "Careful. Those keys aren't made for dirty fingers." The words hit hard. The room fell quieter. Some kids turned to watch. Elijah's ears burned, but he didn't move. The piano suddenly felt farther away, like it was slipping out of reach. He wanted to walk out, or yell, but his voice was trembling. Then, someone laughed. That's all it took. Something in Elijah shifted. Without thinking, he walked forward. The blond boy's smirk faltered. His friends exchanged confused glances. Elijah pulled the bench out, sat down slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry, but his fingers steady. No one moved. He raised his hands above the keys. Hesitated. This wasn't a busted keyboard. This was a real instrument. Real weight. Real resonance. He could feel every eye on his back. Hear the boy's insult echo again. Dirty fingers. He closed his eyes and pressed the first key. A soft, clean C. Then came an E. Then G. He built the chord by feel. No theory, no lessons. Just heart. His left hand followed. Bass notes first, slow and smooth. Then his right hand layered in a melody, familiar but unfinished. It was his tune. The one he played when he was alone. No words. Just truth. The room changed. Voices died out. Conversations halted. Chairs creaked as students leaned in. The blond boy's crew no longer looked smug. Just confused. And Elijah. He wasn't playing for them. He played for the nights in his room with sirens outside. For the Sundays his mother swayed to gospel in church. For every time he was told, "Don't touch that," the music swelled. His fingers flew. Imperfect, but alive. When he stopped, the room didn't respond right away. Then, from the back, came a whisper. "Whoa!" Someone clapped. Then another. And another. Even the blond boy's friends muttered, "That wasn't bad." But Elijah heard the shift. Respect. The door creaked open. The instructor finally entered, clipboard in hand. She paused. "Did I miss something?" A student near the front nodded. "Yeah, you did." Elijah stood up slowly, pushed the bench back. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. For once, the silence spoke for him. And just when he thought it was over, something, or someone, was waiting for him in the hallway. Something that would change his life forever. At first, he thought it was just another student waiting for the next workshop. But then he saw the familiar navy blazer and the initials PJW stitched in gold. Preston. Elijah tensed, instinctively bracing for another jab, another snide remark. But Preston didn't smirk this time. He didn't even have that smug look anymore. He just stood there, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes scanning the floor like he wasn't sure what to say. "You play like my cousin," Preston muttered finally, not quite meeting Elijah's eyes. "He goes to Juilliard." Elijah blinked. Of all the things he expected, a compliment wasn't one of them. Especially not from Preston. "I mean," Preston added, shrugging, "you're rougher. Less trained. But it was good. Really good." There was no sarcasm in his voice. Just something raw. Something unsettled. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to this, being seen, being taken seriously. So he just gave a small nod and kept walking. And for once, Preston didn't stop him. Back on the bus, the energy was different. Kids who'd never spoken to Elijah were suddenly asking questions. Where'd you learn to play like that? Do you take lessons? Was that your own song? Even his own classmates looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time. Like maybe there was more to the quiet kid from Baton Rouge than they thought. But Elijah didn't let it get to his head. He just looked out the window as the iron gates of Bayside Prep faded behind them. And he smiled, not because he'd impressed them, but because for the first time, he hadn't held back. He had played from his soul, and the room had listened. That night, at home, Charlene noticed something different in her son's face as he walked through the door. "You get in trouble?" she asked automatically, flipping through the mail. "No, Ma," Elijah said. "Actually, I think I did something good." She looked up, suspicious but curious. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elijah shrugged. "I played. On a real piano. At that school." Charlene's eyes widened. "Boy, I told you not to touch." "I know," he said gently. "But I had to." He didn't try to explain the feeling. The weight of the keys. The way the room shifted. The way the music felt like a truth that couldn't be ignored. Instead, he just added, "They clapped." Charlene stared at him, her lips pressed tight like she wanted to scold him, but couldn't quite bring herself to. Instead, she exhaled. "Well," she said, turning back to the mail, "long as you didn't break nothin'." But Elijah saw it. The smallest curve of a smile at the corner of her mouth. That was enough. The next morning, everything changed. Miss Delacroix pulled him aside before class, eyes wide and shining. "Elijah Brooks," she said, holding up her phone. "You're internet famous." "What?" She tapped the screen. A video, taken from the back of the Bayside classroom, showed Elijah sitting at the piano, fingers dancing over the keys. The caption read, "Kid from MLK Middle shuts down Bayside's rich kid piano. Just watch." It already had 48,000 views. "Who recorded this?" "Does it matter?" she said, beaming. "You were brilliant." Elijah stared at the screen. At himself. That kid in the video, he looked confident. Strong. Like he belonged. "I've already had 3 calls," Miss Delacroix added. One from the local arts foundation. Another from a piano teacher at Southern University. And one from a very interested reporter. Elijah blinked. "A reporter?" "You're a story now," she said. "But more than that, you're proof. Proof that talent doesn't come from zip codes." By the end of the week, Elijah's life looked completely different. An anonymous donor, no one said it, but he suspected Preston's family had something to do with it, paid for Elijah to take weekly lessons with a retired concert pianist who lived right in Baton Rouge. The rec center, which hadn't been updated in years, received a brand new upright Yamaha piano. Donated by Friends of the Arts, the plaque read. No one had to ask who inspired that. And Elijah, the quiet boy who once tapped rhythms on a busted keyboard, was now playing twice a week at events, fundraisers, and even a church downtown that had an old grand piano gathering dust until he brought it to life. Months passed. Summer came and went. And in the fall, Elijah stood backstage at the Baton Rouge Performing Arts Center, palms sweaty, eyes wide. He was about to perform in a city-wide youth showcase. Over 700 people in the audience. His name was printed in the program, Elijah Brooks, original composition, The City Sings. He took a deep breath. Then another. "You ready?" Miss Delacroix asked, peeking from behind the curtain. Elijah nodded. "Don't worry about the crowd," she said. "Just play for the kid you used to be. The one who dreamed with his fingers." He smiled, stepped into the spotlight, and sat at the grand piano center stage. And when his fingers touched the keys, the city listened. That night, Baton Rouge didn't just hear a song. They heard a voice, one that had been quiet too long. They heard Elijah Brooks. And they would never forget it. 3 months later, New York City felt like another planet. The subway roared beneath Elijah's feet as he stood outside a tall glass building in Manhattan. His coat, a gift from the Arts Foundation back home, didn't quite shield him from the bite of the northern cold, but it wasn't the weather making his hands shake. It was the audition. Juilliard. The name alone felt like a drumbeat in his chest. Inside, he sat with a dozen other teens, all dressed sharp, with resumes that listed competitions, private tutors, and masterclasses overseas. Elijah had none of that. Just a battered composition notebook and one name they all seemed to recognize. "Elijah Brooks," one girl asked, peeking over. "Are you the kid from that video, the one who freestyled at the rich school?" He nodded cautiously. "Dude, you're a legend on TikTok," another boy added. "That run you did in E minor? I studied it." Elijah blinked. People were studying him. Before he could respond, his name was called. He stepped into the room. 3 judges. A grand piano. Silence. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Brooks," said one of the panelists. Elijah sat, let his fingers hover, and thought about home, the rec center, the sound of buses outside MLK Middle, the clatter of pots in his mom's kitchen. He thought of all the things that weren't supposed to lead to this room. And he played. Not just notes. A story. Of hope. Of struggle. Of a city that sings even when no one's listening. 2 weeks passed before the envelope arrived. Elijah almost couldn't open it. His mom, Charlene, had to pry it from his hands. She stared at the seal, heart thumping. "Whatever it says," she whispered, "you already made me proud." Elijah finally tore it open. And there it was. "We are pleased to offer you admission to the Juilliard School." He didn't read the rest. He couldn't. His vision blurred as his mother pulled him into the tightest hug of his life, tears running down her cheeks. The whole block found out within an hour. Miss Delacroix brought over cupcakes. Mr. Johnson down the street offered to buy Elijah new luggage. Even the grumpy lady from apartment 2B smiled and said, "Knew that boy had magic." And just like that, the kid from Baton Rouge who used to bang on a broken Casio keyboard was headed to the biggest stage of his life. But Juilliard wasn't a fairy tale. The halls buzzed with talent, discipline, and legacy. Elijah was surrounded by kids who spoke music theory like a second language and had played concertos since kindergarten. He battled imposter syndrome daily. Every time he sat at a piano, a voice in his head whispered, "You don't belong." Until one day, during a composition workshop, he decided to submit something different. Raw. Southern. With gospel chords and jazz roots, echoing the sounds of home. The professor, an older woman with silver hair and a sharp ear, asked, "What do you call this?" Elijah hesitated. "It's called Porchlight Blues." She nodded slowly. "Feels like something Nina Simone might have played with Miles Davis on a Louisiana porch." The class applauded. And something shifted. Over the next 2 years, Elijah carved a space of his own, not by copying the greats, but by honoring his roots. He played at Lincoln Center. Got invited to compose for a student film at NYU. One of his pieces, Bayou Requiem, was performed by the student orchestra to a standing ovation. But no matter how far he climbed, he never forgot where he came from. One spring, on a break between semesters, Elijah flew home. The rec center still smelled like bleach and basketball sweat. But in the corner stood the upright Yamaha, polished, keys gleaming. A little boy sat on the bench, elbows too high, fumbling through Twinkle Twinkle. Elijah smiled, walked over, and gently placed his hands on the keys next to the boy's. "Mind if I show you something?" The boy's eyes went wide. "Are you the piano guy from YouTube?" Elijah chuckled. "Something like that." He taught him a blues riff. Then stayed for an hour. Then 2. When he finally left, Charlene was waiting outside with a grocery bag full of cornbread and gumbo for him to take back to New York. "You still hungry for the world?" she asked, squinting in the sun. Elijah smiled, gripping the warm bag. "Always." Years passed. And then, one day, Elijah found himself not in a classroom, but standing at the front of one, chalk in hand. Professor Elijah Brooks. Instructor of Composition and Cultural Music Theory, Juilliard School. He looked out at a room full of students, some rich, some not. Some classically trained, others self-taught. All of them curious. He told them about jazz clubs and gospel nights. About how a piano in a rec center changed his life. About why music wasn't just notes and rhythm, but a voice, a way for people from forgotten places to be heard. And when he finished his lecture, a girl in the back raised her hand. "Professor Brooks," she asked, "what if we don't come from fancy schools? What if we're not like the others. He smiled, thought about Preston, about that moment in Bayside, about the silence before he played, then said, "The piano doesn't care where you're from. It just asks one thing: tell the truth." And as his students began to play, Elijah closed his eyes and listened. From a busted keyboard in Baton Rouge to Juilliard's grandest halls, Elijah Brooks didn't just chase his dream. He became it. Not because he had everything, but because he had something no one could teach, a voice worth hearing. The day Elijah Brooks returned to Baton Rouge, the whole block felt it. Not because there were cameras, not because of headlines, but because every front door was open, every heart was full. People didn't just see a man. They saw a miracle in motion. The rec center where Elijah first touched a piano now had a name carved in bronze: the Elijah Brooks Community Arts Center. It stood tall, renovated, restored, reimagined, funded by the foundation Elijah had built from his music. Inside, kids who couldn't afford instruments now played violins, cellos, and pianos. They weren't just learning music. They were learning that they mattered. And then came the biggest moment of all. A local high school auditorium, filled to the brim. The school where Elijah once sat in the back row, invisible, unheard. That night, the mayor, the governor, even journalists from CNN, were all in attendance. But Elijah didn't walk on stage in a tuxedo. He walked out in the same hoodie he wore as a teen. The one he wore when he practiced in secret, with taped-up headphones. The crowd went silent. And Elijah spoke. "I was told once that kids like me don't make it out. That our music isn't for concert halls. That talent doesn't live in broken places." They were wrong. I didn't just make it out. I came back. Because genius lives in the ghettos. Because Mozart could have been from the projects. All we need is a door that opens. And someone who believes we're worth unlocking. He turned to the grand piano behind him, sat down, and played a piece he had never performed anywhere in the world. A new composition. He called it Charlene's Prayer, a tribute to his mother. And as the final note echoed through the hall, the audience stood, not just in applause, but in awe. Some cried, some shouted, some just held their hearts. Because in that moment, they didn't see a poor black boy with a dream. They saw a man who took every rejection, every humiliation, every stereotype, and turned it into a symphony. Later that night, a small boy, maybe 10, tugged Elijah's sleeve outside the hall. "Mr. Brooks, do you think someone like me can play like you someday?" Elijah knelt, looked him in the eye, and said, "Kid, I already hear your music. You just haven't played it yet. But when you do, the world's gonna listen." He took off his Juilliard wristband, the one he'd worn through every concert, and wrapped it around the boy's wrist. "No matter what anyone tells you," he whispered, "you belong." And with that, Elijah Brooks walked away under the streetlights. Not for fame, not for applause, but because he knew his greatest song was still being written.